Gracias. Well, first I wanted to say thank you so much for the invitation to come present here. It's really an honor to be able to come to Medellin and to speak to you all about some of the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, or NIOSH's work. So today I'm going to be speaking about some of our global collaborations and technical assistance. This is a pretty high kind of a 10,000-foot view of some of the things that we do to work with our global partners and how we can do technical assistance activities and support some of those global partners. So I was not alone in developing these slides. These individuals at NIOSH contributed to some slides that I have adapted for use, so I wanted to say thank you to them before starting. And then start by talking about some of the differences for NIOSH and where we sit within the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health in the United States federal government. So NIOSH is within the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Many people know the name CDC. CDC is typically maybe most known for investigating outbreaks of infectious disease, such as the current Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo, or some other activities. But actually, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health is one of the larger centers within the Centers for Disease Control. And we're in the Department of Health and Human Services. We also have the Department of Labor in the United States, and they administer the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, so better known as OSHA. OSHA is responsible for doing enforcement and regulatory activities, whereas NIOSH deals more with public health and research activities within occupational safety and health. So our mission is to generate new knowledge in the field of occupational safety and health, and to transfer that knowledge into workplace practice to prevent work-related injuries, illness, and death. To do that, we have three strategic goals that we operate under, and these goals are set on every 4-year periods. So the first is to conduct research to reduce worker illness and injury and to advance worker well-being. We also want to promote safe and healthy workers through interventions with recommendations and capacity building. And then our third goal in achieving our mission is to enhance worker safety and health through global collaborations. So to do that, we do a number of things. We take a leadership role to share knowledge and best practices of ways to prevent workplace injuries, illness, and we try to disseminate those throughout with our global partners. We provide workplace illness and injury reduction strategies, and we build professional capacity to address these workplace hazards through information sharing and research experience. So we have many global partners at NIOSH, and this is just a list of some of them. We work with the World Health Organization, or WHO, quite a bit, and I'll be speaking a little more about the Pan American Health Organization, or PAHO, whom we work closely with. The International Labor Organization, or ILO. The International Social Security Association, that we call ISA. The Occupational Hygiene Training Association, or OHTA. The International Commission on Occupational Health, or ICO, and other international occupational safety and health institutes. And then from time to time, we do technical assistance on country-level projects when those times arise. And I'll speak a little bit more detail on some of these, but give a brief examples of each one of these as we move forward. So this is a map here of the WHO collaborating centers for occupational health, and it's represented by 6 WHO regions. The stars represent, at one point in time, collaborating centers. That number's been reduced a little bit, so there's a little over 40 collaborating centers for occupational health. And the Pan American region is represented here in red. In actuality, I'm not sure this is fully updated because I believe El Bosque is considered a collaborating center here in Colombia as well. So please accept my apologies for that star not being on the map. So NIOSH works with terms of reference within the WHO collaborating centers. And these are the main terms of reference that we've focused on. So it's in agreement with WHO and PAHO, we provide technical support to national and regional efforts for the eradication of silicosis. So silicosis is a fully preventable occupational disease of the lungs. And actually, Chile has made some really fantastic efforts in their activities to set up a national eradication plan within the country of Chile, and we've helped support those efforts. It's also to contribute to WHO and PAHO work on strengthening health workers' occupational health and safety, as well as strengthening health systems, government capacities, and service delivery for workers' health. So this is kind of under that ideology of trying to get health for all individuals. Not only do we want to make sure that they are getting health care, but also that occupational health is maintained in that mentality. And then to contribute to WHO work on protecting health and safety of workers in preparedness and response activities, as well as the implementation of the International Health Regulations, or IHR. So the way that NIOSH coordinates these efforts is through our Emergency Preparedness and Response Office, or EPRO. Most recently, they have worked on the 2018 hurricane season that really struck the Caribbean very hard, and Puerto Rico and some other areas. And they've helped put out guidelines to help support care. And in agreement with the WHO and PAHO to contribute to the implementation of priorities under the Workers' Health Global Plan of Action and the PAHO's similar product there. So here is the 2019 PAHO Collaborating Centers meeting that was held in August. There were representatives from close to 20 countries in attendance throughout the PAHO region. And NIOSH helped support this effort, but really PAHO was the one driving it. And we reviewed these terms of reference and reestablished commitments and strategies and ways that we could support moving those terms of reference forward through collaboration and at our own institutes. So some of the other things that were talked about and highlighted in those meetings is an emphasis on, when I heard it the first time, I was like, what does that really mean? Just occupational diseases is very broad, right? But really it's the recognition of occupational diseases and the appropriate care for those who are diagnosed with occupational diseases, as well as compensation for those who are affected. So the PAHO is really emphasizing ways to improve access to subject matter expertise and coding for occupational diseases, those sorts of things. And then health promotion. So within NIOSH, we have a program called Total Worker Health, which really emphasizes that workplace exposures do not and hazards in the workplace do not stop, or they're not limited to the hours that employees are working. Work is a part of their overall health, but so are many other aspects. And Total Worker Health establishes centers of excellence throughout the country to really foster this mentality of taking care of a worker with full consideration of all hazards in their work life. And recently, the Total Worker Health Program has started considering expanding beyond the United States, and I believe has just established their first center of excellence outside U.S. borders. So there is an emphasis to grow this program. And then training courses as well. So some examples of some training courses that we've done include this one was in Vietnam, and it was taught at the Vietnam National Institute for Occupational and Environmental Health, a multidisciplinary team, not only of NIOSH representatives, but of International Occupational Hygiene Association, or IOHA members, IAHA, or American Industrial Hygiene Association members, and Workplace Health Without Borders members, joined together in a team and went to Vietnam to help teach about industrial hygiene, ergonomics, those sorts of things. The class focused mostly on the measurement of hazardous substance and consisted of lectures, case studies, exercises, and then industrial hygiene field equipment instruction. So the attendees, there were 54 attendees from a number of government institutions, academia, and industry. And a lot of them had advanced degrees in theoretical science and PhDs in kind of theory relating to environmental and occupational health, but they didn't have some of those practical skills to go out and do data collection and those sorts of things. So this really gave a practical learning experience for these students, which hopefully will help to build capacity, their abilities to get out in the field and do a lot of sampling to support their hazard assessments, risk assessments, those sorts of things. This is just a picture of the class showing all the different people and instructors that were involved. So NIOSH also works pretty regularly with the International Labor Organization, or ILO. So from time to time, the ILO establishes guidelines or guidance where they need to pull on a group of subject matter experts to help develop those guidelines. NIOSH has been asked on a number of occasions to help support some of those guidelines, but really our primary work with them has been in the ILO classification of radiographs for pneumoconiosis and standard images. So if you don't know about the standardization of pneumoconiosis images, I'll give a little bit of background and then go through it with you. So it is a means of describing and recording. So the ILO classification of radiographs, it has been a long time, early in the 20th century, since there was a realization that there needed to be this standardization of images for those that were exposed to inhalation of dusts. So the at the International Conference on Silicosis, which was held in Johannesburg in South Africa in 1930, they developed a system for systematically assessing chest x-rays so they could look at pneumoconiosis disease. These guidelines have been modified a number of times, as you can see from the dates there, with the most recent one being in 2011. NIOSH has been involved in kind of a 10-year effort of supporting the kind of movement into the digital world as well. So it wasn't until 2011 that radiographs, they had to be done on standard film. They could not be taken from a digital and systematically compared. The evidence hadn't been proven for that systematic process. So NIOSH was involved with that, but has since helped support the ILO in identifying digital images from countries that can help with them support their own standardizations and trainings. So this process is used internationally for epidemiologic research, for screening and surveillance for those in dusty occupations, and for clinical purposes as well. The goal is also for it to lead to better international comparability data for those with concerns of pneumoconiosis. And the object is to codify radiographic abnormalities in a simple, reproducible manner. So it does not define pathologic entities, nor does it take into account work capacity. These are kind of important caveats to it. So really, it's not meant to be a workers' compensation mechanism or a legal definition. It's meant to look at the epidemiology and to standardize it across groups. So I'll walk through just kind of what it looks like for those of you that may not be familiar with it. They're coded based on small opacities and large opacities. So this is an image here that is coded as 00 because it's essentially a normal chest X-ray. And then as the profusion of small opacities pervades, you can see that that grading scale goes up from 00, 01, 10, 11. And here you see it's fairly diffuse, but then at 3.3, those small opacities are all the way through the lung fields. They're also graded based on the large opacities here. So you can see something there, but there's not much up in that right upper lobe. And then you can see the confluence of these large opacities until basically a whiteout as that grading system increases. All right. So this is just this digital transition of the standards and guidelines that NIOSH helped support. And you can see now you can get these online and review them at your convenience. They can be downloaded at no charge, and they can be used on a regular computer monitor for study purposes, whereas actual grading in the ILO system needs to be done on a very specified monitor. B-reader examinations with digitized images are also performed by NIOSH, so NIOSH really is the champion of this B-reader process. Those are performed in Morgantown, West Virginia in the United States of America. So. And they have been provided at international courses as well, but primarily what happens is people will come to Morgantown, West Virginia, they get a feel for the equipment, they get to go over some basics, and then they sit for a test to qualify for this ability to be a B reader. It's a very difficult test, but it's very important to make sure that there's a systematic approach to this. NIOSH has also provided this at international courses in Thailand and Australia and some countries in Africa. Basically, they will host the training there, and then NIOSH provides like the information technology support and that kind of thing. So moving on from the ILO is the International Social Security Association, or as we said, ISA. So ISA is, they are an important partner, and we work with them mostly on the Special Commission for Prevention. So within the Special Commission, there's 13 sections that are kind of focus areas, but they really look at this three-dimensional prevention approach consisting of risk management, health promotion, and return to work measures. It coordinates joint activities, and they abide by this Vision Zero campaign that they have, which you can see the website here. Really, the idea of this Vision Zero campaign is that they're trying to have safety, health, and well-being, but it's a belief that all accidents are preventable. All diseases in the workplace are preventable. Basically, things that will cause harm to workers in the workplace are preventable. So the vision is that there are zero injuries, illnesses, that kind of thing. And then we work a fair bit with the International Commission on Occupational Health as well. It's also called ICO. So it's the world's leading international scientific society in the field of occupational health, and it's got about over 2,000 members from 93 countries and many institutional members as well, including NIOSH. So ICO has a really good relationship with the WHO and with the ILO as well, and so they help provide some of that kind of professional society support. There are 37 scientific committees within this group, and you can belong to 3 committees if you join. Really, the difficult thing with ICO from joining is that you have to know other members. So you have to know you have to know 3 of those 2,000 professionals who will recommend you for membership there. But They also hold, each one of these scientific committees will hold conferences as well. And NIOSH personnel often support those presentations and meetings. In fact, I just was recently in one that was supporting the occupational health protections for health workers. So ICO is just an example of some of the type of work that they do and we've done with them. In 2018 at the United Nations General Assembly, they had a unique meeting to address global tuberculosis. And ICO was very influential in securing wording and resolutions passed at this UN General Assembly to commit these countries to implementing primary prevention in high-risk occupations for reducing silica dust exposure in mining, construction, and other dusty workplaces, and worker TB surveillance and infection prevention, and control in healthcare settings. So this is really, I mean, a fantastic feat to have the UN committing their member states to occupational health. So it's really a fantastic an effort on their part, and NIOSH personnel were directly involved with supporting that effort. We also do joint projects with other institutes for occupational safety and health throughout the world. So this is a project that NIOSH did looking at improving workers' health across the globe, and it was primarily driven with the Finnish Institute of Occupational Health. And in it, the collaborators discussed best practices related to occupational health and real like personal examples of individuals, countries, workplaces that had tackled difficult issues. Here's an example. I put in some of the examples from the Paho region here, so you were just aware of kind of some of the work that has been highlighted there. This is in Grenada, where the nutmeg industry was kind of an essential part of their economy. And in 2004, Hurricane Ivan came through and basically wiped that out. And St. George's University, which is a collaborating center with PAHO, really did a lot of research and work to help organize a movement to restore that economy, but included occupational health in all the practices that they were implementing. And this is a project that was done with WHO, PAHO, NIOSH, basically translating and adapting a Spanish toolkit for bloodborne pathogen exposure and prevention of needle stick injuries in Venezuela. So those groups were able to partner with academic institutes, health and safety committees in a country in Venezuela to really make dramatic reductions in workplace injuries in the health worker sector. And then this is a little bit of what we were talking about before with Chile's national plan to eliminate silicosis, kind of leading the effort to be a country that commits to eradicating an occupational disease. And then I wanted to take a little bit of time to discuss some of the collaboration we have with the Occupational Hygiene Training Association. So I don't know how many of you are aware of OHTA. Anybody? Okay, good. So OHTA is an informal collaboration between occupational hygiene professionals. So in the United States, we call it industrial hygiene. Occupational hygiene is a very synonymous term, but primarily used other places. And the goal is to foster healthy working environments throughout the world by this group. So they're an international program that they're supported by many national programs and the IOHA that we spoke to earlier. And really their goal is training. Their mentality is that they want to build capacity through training efforts throughout the world so that all people basically have access to occupational hygiene, risk assessment, risk prevention, and mitigation. And between 2010 and 2016, there were 600 courses administered in 40 different countries. So NIOSH entered into a partnership with them based on a common mission to prevent occupational accidents and diseases worldwide. And we partnered to develop and enhance education and training and identify opportunities to promote occupational safety and health findings and disseminate those things, as well as facilitate dissemination of information in all different media types. So the projects were chosen based on the decisions of what the global burden of issues were and what kind of NIOSH's expertise to contribute to OHTA were as well. So one project was on silica control, another was in hazards in the oil and gas industry, which is kind of a niche part that NIOSH had expertise in, and then hearing loss and noise. So I'll highlight the silica part first. So we all know silica is an issue of global impact. There are 227 million workers who are employed in high-risk industries worldwide. And industries aren't isolated to one thing like mines. They span a wide variety of industries, so construction, mining, all sorts of different things. Exposed workers are often from vulnerable or medically underserved populations, and that includes over 1 million children. It results in both preventable respiratory and non-respiratory diseases, including autoimmune and kidney disease. And so when we partnered, we had an occupational medicine physician, certified industrial hygienist, or CIH, and then a health communication specialist. And we worked closely with global industry CIH, so they were with private industry but worked in many different global markets. And then a non-governmental organization, CIH, and they worked with an NGO who the focus of that NGO was to do industrial hygiene assessments in developing countries, I should say. So we were all from the US, but these guys had a tremendous amount of global expertise, and then our industrial hygienists at that time had done a lot of work in the global sector as well. We reviewed and provided comments on what had been a pre-developed student manual from years ago. We designed a whole nother training for them for silica awareness to be implemented in developing countries. And we drafted a companion reference guide to go with those instruction materials that could help supplement that training for individuals that were interested in additional reading, learning, okay, what are the hazards, how do I prevent them? They could take it the next step themselves. Currently, so these bars here tell kind of which parts we were involved with. We really got completed it once we finished the reference guide. And it is since those materials OHTA has disseminated to the PAHO collaborating partners. So most member states in PAHO now have that and are looking for instructors to implement it. So hazards in the oil and gas industry is very different, right? There isn't a huge global burden of disease that people generally think of when they associate oil and gas industry. But in the United States, there's over 400,000 workers that are employed in oil and gas extraction. And our Western States Division within NIOSH has done a lot of work looking at annual fatality rates through their fatality of oil and gas database. And they've found that there are 6 times higher, fatality rates are 6 times higher than the rate in all U.S. workers. So NIOSH was found to have expertise not only in performing that fatality surveillance, but also conducting research to identify and control those hazards and disseminate public health information. So NIOSH supported it with a large number of personnel, including CIHs, an epidemiologist, and a health communication specialist. And then OHTA provided a occupational hygienist from Australia, which had done a lot of work in that sector as well. And they reviewed a pre-existing module and identified gaps in the curriculum, and then gave suggestions to update the materials, which have been incorporated on vehicle safety, silica control in the oil and gas industry, and from oil and from fracking as well. and hydrocarbon exposures, which is a considerable concern in the United States oil gauging work process. So currently, NIOSH has delivered those materials to OHTA, and they're working to disseminate them now. And then the hearing loss and noise was chosen for the global burden of disease, as 466 million people worldwide are affected by hearing loss, and a large percentage of that is due to occupational noise risk factors. These cause about 4.2 million disability-adjusted life years, and a large proportion is preventable with proper workplace controls. So NIOSH provided a PhD audiologist to support this effort, and then OHTA, you can see, had a whole different hosts of professionals, some from the U.S. private industry, that were CIHs, engineers who knew a lot about abatement and noise controls, and then private New Zealand occupational hygienists and private United Kingdom occupational hygienists as well. So they've identified areas for improvement, and then they updated the course with practical materials, and then implemented this two-step process, which is a little bit complicated. And they're now in the second step of that review, because it is kind of a unique two-step process they've kind of put in place. During that, they also kind of pivoted to work on the World Hearing Day. So World Hearing Day is aimed to raise global awareness of hearing loss and deafness prevention, as well as ear and hearing care. And so World Hearing Day was basically this push to recognize this as an issue, and it was supported by many, many different agencies, both government agencies in the U.S. and foreign government agencies, including, I always mess up the acronym, but France's ISRI, I believe, the World Health Organization, professional societies, academia. They launched this wiki edit-a-thon where they wanted to get out information, and they really had some pretty fantastic results. From this, they translated hearing health websites into 14 different languages, basically expanding who could learn about some of these issues. They initiated an online platform to capture contributions, and they administered a hands-on workshop. And these were numbers from their impact related to the World Hearing Day push that they did. And you can see they had a potential of reaching up to 2.8 million people. I'm sure some of those were repeat visitors, but still pretty impressive. So now I want to move a little bit. So that's kind of the general overview of how our partners and how we work with our partners. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about the technical assistance aspect of what we do. So technical assistance is more providing some of that expertise for very defined moments in time. So how are technical assistance requests made? Well, country agencies, bodies, states, they can directly contact NIOSH officials through scientific meeting collaborations, can request assistance through PAHO or the WHO, or also through involvement with the NIOSH Health Hazard Evaluation Program, and I'll talk a little bit more about that now. So if you're not familiar with the HHE program, that's where I work on a daily basis. And our mission is to help employers and employees recognize and control health hazards in their workplace. And we do that by providing assistance to evaluate new and recurring workplace health hazards, and then raise awareness of new and recurring hazards on preventive measures based on the findings from that workplace. So in 1970, the Occupational Safety and Health Act created OSHA, and it created NIOSH. It was our legislation for occupational safety and health. But in that act, it also required that hazard evaluations be performed, and there be a mechanism where employees or employers or a union could request assistance from the federal government, and the federal government, i.e. NIOSH, could support them and do an evaluation. So that what that does is OSHA will have a right of entry at workplaces where, remember, there are legally enforceable arm. They will go in with the purpose of investigating, potential of levying fines. We have that same right of entry, but we're not going in to fine the company. We're going in to do a hazard assessment, an epidemiologic evaluation, provide recommendations back to the company, unions, or employees on how to best protect themselves. The authority for that right of entry really is with the United States and affiliated territories, but we have received requests through our HHE program that have translated into international technical assistance efforts. This is just an example of all the different HHEs. So in the U.S., the federal government, pretty much anything you do, if it's not national security, you have to provide it back to the taxpayers. So we write a report for every evaluation that we do. It varies from infectious diseases, tuberculosis, lead and bullet manufacturers, unintentional exposure to illicit drugs. I mean, just a wide variety. We get involved with a great deal of topics, and if you go to this page, you can search it by keyword. So if you're interested in a toxicologic exposure of cyanide or something, you could put it in there and see what we have. If you're interested in an industry like the oil and gas industry, you can type it in there and see what we have. I give you this link here, but in all honesty, it's just easier to go to Google and type in HHE search, and it'll pop right up. So here's some examples of requests for technical assistance that we have. And I won't dive too deep into this one because you can hear more about it by Dr. Brian Kerwin's talk tomorrow. This was a follow-up from a WHO Collaborating Center meeting and PAHO Collaborating Center meetings where it was discussed where there were issues with kind of identifying risk factors and further gaps in research related to chronic kidney disease of non-traditional origin. So El Salvador invited NIOSH into the country to do research on that topic, to look at prevention strategies, intervention projects there. So if you're interested in hearing more about that, please come to Dr. Kerwin's talk tomorrow. It is a fascinating topic. We've also had requests for technical assistance from Zambia. So for those of you that aren't aware, Zambia is in Central Africa, as seen here. It's a landlocked country, but it has a very resource-rich country. So there's minerals, metals, gemstone mining is a very prominent industry there. And they're one of Africa's largest generators of copper and cobalt. Obviously, we know that mining exposes employees to a wide variety of different potential hazardous exposures, including silica, which we talked about before. What we hadn't really talked about is silica's relationship with tuberculosis, and tuberculosis' relationship with HIV. So back in, I think it was 2016, maybe a little before that, the World Bank funded a project to tackle tuberculosis in Southern Africa's high TB burden countries. And because Zambia had such a large mining industry, they said, we're not just going to look at tuberculosis, we're going to look at silica prevention, which will help us with tuberculosis. So TB and silicosis in Zambia, so the TB prevalence is 455 per 100,000 in a population, so it's a high burden nation. But then also, silicosis has been estimated by their occupational safety and health government body there to be up to 22%, which is an exceptional amount of silicosis in any work group. And we also know that TB and HIV co-infection is a major issue as well. So this was kind of the perfect storm to really tackle this project. So they decided that they wanted to be a center of excellence. So they asked for NIOSH's support to help become a center of excellence to tackle this issue of silicosis and TB And what way would NIOSH best help them, they decided, was to be a center for occupational respiratory disease. So we are, NIOSH is experts in this bee reading courses and the ILO standardization of images for pneumoconiosis. So they went, and the initial visit was in July of 2017, and they took a look at some of the radiography equipment that they had available there, and you can see it was outdated, as was their kind of X-ray storage processes. So there was room for improvement here. And this is just a shot of kind of the general work that is done in an emerald mine there. You can see over a year's time with focused outreach projects that NIOSH went out and helped them with, as well as support from their government and the World Bank and partners, they were able to change this into a state-of-the-art radiology reading room. And this allowed them to become, gave them the capability to read the images, and also become not just a center of excellence there in their country, but also for the region of Southern Africa. NIOSH also went back in November of 2018, and I think they've been back one more time since then in the last 2 months, and have held bee reader training courses there to help build capacity and improve their ability to standardize these images. Also, they've done this really unique and interesting process, or have initiated it, of starting a project with Project ECHO. So if you're not familiar with Project ECHO, it is a telemedicine program that is used in the United States a fair bit. And they basically hold grand rounds with medicine professionals and professionals that don't have an awareness of certain expertise, but their population has a high burden. They're able to reach back to experts and do these telemedicine rounds. So the idea was, through Project ECHO, they could reach back to bee readers who could support them and help them standardize these images and support their ability to become a standardized or a center of excellence. All right, so this is the last technical assistance that I am going to run through. It is on a response that we did in Guyana. This one gets a little bit more detailed. So Guyana, you guys know better than I do, I'm sure. It's a northern part of South America, bordered by Atlantic Ocean, Venezuela, Brazil, and Suriname as well. So the word Guyana actually means land of waters, because it's a main watershed. They've got a very robust kind of ecosystem that has lots of rivers. Georgetown is the country's capital. You can see it right there as a star. Most of the population lives in the northern coastal region there, as evidenced by the light green, red, and the star. You can see this is called the interior of the country and has very low population density. Mining and quarrying, including gold mining, accounts for 15.4% of their gross domestic product, or GDP. They really, it's a major part of their economy. And that includes artisanal and small-scale gold mining, also called ASGM. So are you all familiar with the process of ASGM? No? Okay, great. We'll go a little bit deeper into that. But first I wanted to talk about how Guyana kind of deals with their mining industry in the country. So the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission, or GGMC, they're responsible for doing things like approving permits and allowing miners to come and say, I'm going to mine this area, and basically self-identify to them. They grant authority to them, and then that gives them the ability to go out and do compliance or reviews to make sure that they are doing mining safe and healthy, not only for the people, but for the environment as well. type of work for Guyana or GGMC workers, it can be administrative work, or it can also be field work where they're going out to the mines and they're seeing what type of work is being done. And then there's the Guyana Gold Board, or GGB. So the Guyana Gold Board's role is mostly to bring gold into the economy and then to kind of monitor it. So really what they're doing is they are, the primary function that we saw is they were getting, miners would mine gold and they would bring it to them where once they brought it to them, they could have it tested for purity. So the GGB would smelt it, boil it down, test it for purity, and then would give it back to the miners. So in that process, they were able to put a taxation on it, but then also it was a way of formalizing it into the formal economy, so that, you know, artisanal and small-scale gold mining, or ASGM, is often done in the informal economy. So this is a way of bringing it into the formal economy for them. Worldwide, ASGM employs 10 to 15 million miners, and it supplies up to 15% of the world's gold supply, so quite a bit. It's present in over 70 countries, and elemental mercury is a very common substance used during it, so it results in the release of more than 1,400 tons of mercury per year. Mercury, the way that this process works is mercury is mixed with gold-containing materials like an ore, and it forms this mercury-gold amalgam where it binds it together. The amalgam is then heated, and it removes mercury in the form of vapor, in theory leaving pure gold. However, there's still some potential for mercury residual. Workers are exposed to mercury vapor when they burn it off, because they burn it off with whatever they have available, Bunsen burner, hot plate, whatever they have. As is the surrounding community, as that vapor is released into the air and enters back into that water life table. Elemental mercury can cause a number of different health effects at very high levels. It can cause lung damage, or like an acute pneumonitis. Central nervous system effects, or irritability, depression, erythism, tremors, a variety of things, peripheral neuropathies, and then kidney damage, especially with chronic exposures. So the technical assistance was was submitted in April 2018 by the Guyana Civil Servants and General Workers Union, and they requested help from PAHO. So PAHO contacted NIOSH to provide the technical assistance, and the concern was that there was mercury exposure at a shared complex between GGMC and GGB, the Gold Board and the Mines Commission. At that complex, the GGB was performing gold burning and smelting operations, and employees were concerned that that vapor was not escaping or being captured appropriately. So NIOSH responded with an evaluation in June of 2018, where we evaluated the main complex and an interim gold burning and smelting facility they had, and then also a follow-up visit where ventilation engineers looked at the main complex again, but then also a new facility that had been put online. So industrial hygienists, they used the Jerome 431 real-time mercury vapor analyzer to look at what levels of mercury were in the air. They also performed surface wipe samples, colorimetric samples, to detect if there was mercury residual or mercury dust at the workplace, and then reviewed facility plans for the facility that was coming online. From a medical perspective, we interviewed employees. We always do confidential medical interviews when we interview them, and looked for symptoms and that kind of thing. We also reviewed blood test results and medical records. And then we reviewed the medical protocols for treatment that had been employed. The engineers did that follow-up ventilation assessment, and they looked at a number of different things. So they measured mercury vapor concentrations at the complex again, as well as other companies in the surrounding area. but they evaluated GGB's new gold burning and smelting facility and looked at room supply air velocity, room air changes, hood face velocities, as you can see, a number of different things. So at the main complex, they took 110 measurements, but only 4 were above detectable ranges in the air, and 0.003 milligrams per meter cubed was the limit of detection, and the range was 0.003 to 0.009. They did surface sample wipes at this same location, 12 surface sample wipes, and they found that at the majority of locations they were detecting some mercury dust with the colorimetric wipes. They found that mostly those areas were prominently dusty locations, like in the library that was seldom used. You can see here a windowsill of a library that's dusty. But also computer housings, which are routinely dusty areas, that kind of thing. At the interim facility, so to keep, because this was such a major portion of their economy, they couldn't just halt all testing of gold. So they moved it to a different facility while that one was being shut down to have an assessment. And so we did that evaluation and used 4 different measurements with 2 different instruments. And we found that in the burn room, the levels were above almost to 1 milligram per meter cubed, which is extremely high. So that's 10 times the NIOSH ceiling limit of 0.1 milligram per meter cubed. And that NIOSH ceiling limit is meant to prevent unsafe or unhealthy effects to workers at any moment in time. So a ceiling limit is not based on a full workday, just a moment. The NIOSH recommended exposure limit, or REL, and the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists, their threshold limit value, they have a full work shift levels of 0.05 milligrams per meter cubed. And you can see if these levels were sustained throughout the day, they would have exceeded those as well. The new facility, there were 2 burning rooms. One was operational during the visit. The other one was down. And then there was a smelting room, scrubber facilities, and offices located on the 2nd floor. So they had office spaces kind of commingled with their burning operations, as well as the fact the building was located in the middle of homes and shops. These are just some images of some of those burning smelting hoods and scrubber systems. Burning hood, smelting hood, scrubber. And basically, they found that these are some of the ventilation results. I won't go too in depth with them. And that, importantly, I want to highlight this. In the burning and smelting room, the air supplied was greater than the air exhausted, and the rooms were positive to the hallway, meaning that contaminated air could flow into adjacent customer waiting areas and hallways. The scrubber system had adequate function, as unlikely the air was re-entraining mercury vapor from the exhaust. From a medical perspective, so they had done blood testing results. The blood tests showed that their mean was about 5.6 micrograms per liter. These numbers are stratified by age range and current job tenure, and there were no significant findings there. But we also looked at lab workers versus non-lab workers and field workers versus non-field workers. So our lab worker assessment was a little bit limited in that we only had a handful of people. But there were a couple of levels that were very high for these 2. And then field workers, so field workers spend more time outside the facility. Non-field workers spend time in the facility. And interestingly, initial looked like the field workers had potentially higher exposures. So it may not have been the site that was exposing mercury to the worker more commonly, but then also if those individuals are going into mines during their compliance, they may have an additional source for mercury exposure. So because of that, we also looked at non-occupational exposures. So we looked to see what fish intake, which is associated with organic mercury, could affect blood mercury levels. And we broke the groups into high fish intake and low fish intake. And you can see the high fish intake group was higher than the low fish intake group, and it made our association between field workers and non-field workers non-statistically significant. So it essentially was a confounder. That's one of the reasons why ACGIH recommends not using blood, but using urine tests for mercury, especially in occupational settings. So the blood test isn't a good test when differentiating between the different types of mercury, the organic mercury seen in the diet from fish, or elemental mercury from workplace exposure. But they did not have urine test results available at the time that we came. So medical interview results really did not show anything significant related to health effects. Interestingly, symptomatic and non-symptomatic people that we interviewed were given therapy kind of equally. So the treatment protocols were not being utilized based on what objective data they had from symptoms or from blood mercury levels either. It was kind of just a decision that the treating provider said, we're going to need to chelate everybody here, or we're going to need to do these. This phase 1 is like it doesn't have a chelating agent like this DMSA, but it was meant to be a treatment for mercury toxemia. So for our conclusions, we had the high mercury vapor levels were measured and showed that levels could reach or exceed ceiling limits and would likely exceed full shift exposure limits if those were routine tasks during GGB activities. Surface wipe samples were positive, especially dusty ones, and employees had higher levels of mercury in their blood than other populations that we had seen with accessible data. However, Guyana didn't have comparison data available. And chelation should be based on a clear exposure history and objective evidence of exposure. The treating provider needs to have a discussion about risks and side effects and shouldn't be using homeopathic medications or non-vitamin dietary or herbal supplements, because those potentially can cause harm. So we use this hierarchy of controls to make recommendations, the most effective being elimination and substitution, the least being PPE. Engineering controls isolate the worker from the hazard. Those are good. Administration controls are based more on work practice adjustments, policy adjustments, that sort of thing. So we recommended that they use an alternative to mercury during amalgamation of gold. So borax is a substance that is much less hazardous than mercury, and it actually has been shown to be equally, if not more effective during amalgamation. And then for engineering controls, we recommended removing the mercury contaminated items from the facility, sealing the gold burning room so there wasn't a potential for that air transfer, keeping the room negatively pressured, and then maintaining the face velocity of the burning hood at ideal feet per minute. We also recommended that they collect some full shift personal monitor during their work. Because we had a real-time monitor, we were extrapolating that information, and it's something that they were going to need to follow up and continue to monitor with full shift activities on top of some of those real-time measurements. And then to also develop and implement a respiratory protection program. And I failed to mention this earlier, but they did have respirators in the gold burning facility, but those were actually meant for the clients that were coming in. So when the clients brought their gold, the worker would hand them a respirator and say, you can wear this if you want. But the clients also didn't want to leave the room because the worker had their gold, right? That's their money. So they didn't have any program in place for the worker themselves. So we recommended developing that, implementing a medical monitoring program that focused on urine mercury, not blood, and then developing standing operating procedures for mercury monitoring and few to hood checks, as well as a corrective maintenance program for their ventilation systems. And then for PPE, more details related to the respiratory protection, use of nitrile gloves under their heat-resistant gloves, boots and shoe covers inside the burn room, and then washable or disposable coveralls. Oops. So that's just a really in-depth discussion about the types of technical assistance that we may get involved with. I just wanted to highlight that one example to show kind of what not only our HHEs are like, but what our technical assistance may be for certain emergency response or activities, if there's any requests that are put in for us. So with that, I think I've given you all maybe more than you want to hear related to global collaborations and technical assistance with us. NIOSH, we're very interested in, it's one of our strategic goals to improve worker safety and health throughout the globe. So we are always open to hear about further collaboration. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us, talk to us, let us know if you have issues, concerns, or other potential areas for collaborating. These are some of the people at NIOSH that really contributed to this. And then also I wanted to recognize PAHO and all the partners here as well.